Diogweed Galera Cordia August Foil to Road. Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lir Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And we're just laughing there actually because Brian Hoban said to me there one day when I said for the first day that I was interviewing Dr. John Cullinane, he said, Mary, that's going to turn into a Netflix series because there's so much to talk about. And he's right, because I think we're on to episode 3 now, and of here with Dr. John Cullinane. Hello, John.
Hi there, Mary. How are you doing?
I'm sure I'm very good. Before we came on, you talked about a very good, important quote. I thought it was wonderful. You might tell us about it again.
Well, we were talking about Brian's remark and I going on forever, and I'm noted kind of for talking and talking. And I latched onto a good saying. The answer to depression is expression. In other words, express yourself, talk about it, and talk to others, and maybe we would have a little bit less depression in the world.
People would be, I think people would feel less insular, and especially in situations like this, people tend to think, well, in life, I think people tend to think their own problems, and they are, to each person, their own problems are major often, but they can be, you can actually feel a whole lot better when you have other people to talk to. And I think that's what I hope these shows are doing, is giving people a focus away from themselves for a while.
Yes, indeed.
And to listen to their colleagues, because we can't meet each other, so we might as well listen to the lives. But John, you were one of the founders, if not the founder, of the World Irish Dancing Championships, which is what we're going to be talking about today. 1970.
1970.
And that's an amazing photograph of you, John. There's John with the glasses at the back, and his team, who won the World Championships 1970 and 71.
Yes, the first year we won the we won the Cayley Championship. O'Rourke's actually won the figure dance that year, and we won the Cayley.
Sorry, John, for interrupting. Was that the Bridges of Ross?
No, sorry, O'Rourke's team, is it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure really.
I remember as a child, I remember the Bridges of Ross, and it was outstanding, absolutely outstanding.
You know who you would, who might remind you that was, it came up at a commission meeting not so long ago. Anthony Costello and Charles.
Yeah, he was in it. They were both in it, and John O'Rourke.
It came up that I was announcing for the first World Championships, and they both at a commission meeting said how thrilled they were when they went up to Dublin in 1970, and they heard this familiar voice, Cork voice, that they knew from the Munsters. I was announcing at the first World, and in fact, of the people who announced at the first Worlds, as far as I know, there are only 2 of us left, Eamon de Wall and myself.
Wow.
Yeah, because all the, it was a very small committee, and out of that, you had to be willing to do all the announcing in Irish.
Oh God, that's going back to what you said about the commission at a previous, that was the problem, was everything was Oscailga, and not everybody spoke Irish fluently. Do you think that that's a good thing? And in some respects, I think it's a good thing, because it forces people to have the language and keep it alive. Like the French don't really like to speak English, and they're very proud of their language. Do you think there should be a push in this country for all schools to be in Irish?
Yes, I think I made an impassioned speech not so long ago at the Commission when they were talking about introducing some Irish at the grade exams, and I said it doesn't burden any teacher to learn a small amount of Irish. After all, you're earning your living through Irish culture. And if you were teaching in France or so on, you would learn to speak French and so on. And I said, and furthermore, young kids, they love learning languages. They're like sponges.
Absolutely.
So it's not a difficulty for them. It may be a difficulty for you, but not for the little kids. They'll always ask you, what's the other word, kind of, meaning what's the Irish word, kind of, so
well, I see it with my friend, my best friend, since we were 4. Her children, well, they were born in Libya, so they speak Libyan and they speak Arabic, because Libyan and Arabic is different, and they speak English as good as their English is as native as their Arabic and their Libyan. So and now they're learning Irish in school, because one of them is in primary and the other is just gone into Laurel Hill, and it's amazing that by the time they're 12, 13 years of age, they have 4 languages, because they're sponges. And if you're learning it and speaking it every day in school, like you are in a Gael school, you're going to pick it up better than learning it through rote, like I did.
Our Munster Championships were set up in '68, and I did some announcing at that from '68, and as you know, celebrated 50 years of doing my announcing at the Munsters. So at the Worlds, I went up, because I was on the committee, and I went up to Seamus McAnulagh and Sean O'Dolig and them, and I asked, could I do some announcing? And I remember Seamus and they eyeing each other and looking with a code as though I wasn't there. And eventually Seamus said to me, Galéir os Gaeilge a Ghean, everything in Irish. And I said, Park galore, landed me to right. So, and I went ahead and announced my competitions. My Irish wasn't fantastic, but I did always did my announcing in Irish. And that is how I got to be actually announcing at the first World Championships. And as I say, the only other person there announcing that is still alive is in the wall, because it was a fairly small committee running the world, and it met on a very ad hoc basis, kind of. And I very quickly go through some of the names in tribute.
Before you do, John, show me the wonderful photograph that you have of that, and tell us the story about it. Yeah, there you go.
Is that at the right angle? Yeah.
Yeah, World Cup for Cork dancers.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of data on that, because it was printed in the Cork Echo in 1970. And you see, we have very little records left from the first Worlds for a few reasons. Very few people had cameras 50 years ago. So people didn't have photographs. There was no such thing as an official photographer. And that was printed in one of the newspapers. And in fact, the newspapers didn't give us very much coverage at all. So I got the local kind of Cork Examiner to print that up. And at the time, the caption might sound very funny, but at the time, the World Cup final was on that chair, and I don't know where it was being played, but we took that photo up in Fitzgerald's Park, and it is kind of rather than your usual 4 boys in front and 4 girls behind or whatever, we came up with this wall effect, all at different levels. And the title then, World Cup for Cork Dancers. And it was very eye-catching because the number of people in Cork who read that at the time was amazing. In the article, actually, there is a write-up on the world and some of the results. And I just give you a fill-in. It is a record in that newspaper. I won the senior Cayley and second in the figure dance. And then the next year I won the figure dance. But that year as well, there were subsidiary competitions the first year of the Worlds. The World itself was held in Colosh de Bura in Parnell Square.
My times change size-wise.
A beautiful, beautiful auditorium. But round the corner, there was a second hall. I think it was the Matt Talbot Hall.
Yeah.
And I think it was upstairs. And they had subsidiary competitions. And my senior group won first in the Humours Abandon, first in the 3-hand rail, and second in the 2-hand rail. And that is kind of recorded in that newspaper, because after that year, it was decided, look, we had we were crashing down under people and entries and everything. The first year, it was really too much of a success, and it was decided that we'd have to cut those competitions out of any subsidiary competitions. But that's a record of they haven't been run that year.
You know, I wrote down this here now in case I'd forget to ask you, but based on, you were talking about, you know, the fact that there weren't any photographs and there was nothing, do you think, you know, a personal view, that not being allowed to video or not being allowed to photograph can actually be a hindrance to that at competitions? Because I know from myself, I would wish to be able to look back now. You could at that time if you had cameras and things like that, but it wasn't a thing we did to actually bring a camera along and video or photograph. But nowadays people do when they have their mobile phones and that. And you think that if that was available to people, there'd be a lot more records in the future that historians could avail of.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that has solved itself now, in that everybody has a camera now to their phone. But the question I would put to you in reply to that is there any use in having a rule that you cannot enforce? Because cameras now, i.e. Cameras on your little phone, they're so tiny.
They are. And
if I come up to a person in the hall and say, you're not allowed to video, and they say, I'm not videoing, I'm on my phone, kind of, you know?
Yeah. It's almost impossible to man.
Yeah. And in some respects, we were a bit too strict. I remember there was a Swiss group over at the Worlds in Belfast.
Probably their first time ever competing.
No, they weren't competing. They were making a film.
Okay.
I have a copy of it there, Budley or something. And they came to me because they had been refused permission to film at the Worlds. And then they came to me and asked me, was there any chance of I talking to them? And so I met up with them in the Hilton Hotel next door. And they made a terrific film movie. And actually it was premiered a few years later at the Galway Film Festival. And I was invited up for that because of my contribution. And they weren't coming at it from a dancing point of view, or stealing steps or stealing material or whatever. They actually were investigating a dance, a percussive dance
Yeah,
that they found in parts of Switzerland, and they were trying to find out in two villages, and they were trying to find out the origins of those.
yeah, because sometimes I think we can actually bite our nose to spite our face, and we can actually, I mean, you know, there's ways of promoting Irish dancing beyond competition and that. And children nowadays are so smart that all they have to do is look at a set once, and they have it picked up. You know, they don't even need photography and things like that. And I think from the Zoom and things like that, and from all the people doing having different pages on Facebook and that, the Irish dancing community, I think we're all learning that we're learning from each other, because there's lots of people putting up trad sets on YouTube and that, and sharing them. And it's lovely to see all the different traditional hornpipes and the different traditional sets. You're not on Facebook, John. You should get onto Facebook, because it's mighty. Not Peter Smith, Lord rest him, but there's some extraordinary collaborations and that of traditional sets, and it's really nice to be able to that collegiality, that sense of learning from each other. Jimmy Smith, you know, with the traditional set dances, and we're all learning from each other now that we weren't doing before COVID, because you were afraid of everything, really. And I would like to see, I suppose, people holding on to that post COVID, remaining collegial, if you like, and learning from each other, like I'm learning from you, to you know, through these interviews. We probably wouldn't have sat down, John, only for COVID.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
You know, but carry on anyway about the your journey with the World Championships.
Well, the idea of the first World Championships were held in 1970.
1970.
The idea was being floated around for a few years. It just didn't happen over the weekend.
Yeah.
So the idea was there from about the 1968 onwards. And it is interesting because it coincided with one of the worst periods in Irish dancing history, i.e. the split that took place.
Yeah.
So right throughout the late 1968s and 69s, ready for the Worlds, preparing a structure for a World Championship. And at the same time, the split was occurring. And so when we came to January 1970, a huge number of our teachers were gone from the organization. And some of those were people who took part in the All-Irelands and the provincials as they run up to the Worlds. And then they were gone from the organization when we went ahead. We also had a very important question in January 1970, and that's where I was co-opted onto the committee. The question arose, do we still go ahead with the World Championship? How many teachers are left with the commission? And so on and so forth. So we decided to go ahead with it and to set up a committee that met on Friday night. That committee, as I said, they're nearly all dead by now. It met actually in the Belvedere Hotel down by Barry's there in Dublin on Friday night. And I just quickly go through. Cormac McGinley was a president, or that, he's dead. Seamus McAnulla is dead.
There's Seamus there.
Yes.
My hand is there. Yeah. And Matty Malady.
Yeah, and
Eamon DeWall.
Eamon DeWall, and myself. Tom Farley is dead. So Matty Malady is dead. And I have the caption over that. It's the one I came up with myself.
Founding fathers of
I
the World
dubbed
Championship.
them the founding fathers of the World Championships because they were the people, the two that did all most of the running that I could see. In fact, when I went up on Friday nights, and this is a little interesting aside, I was lecturing in Galway at the time, and the professor head of my department was Professor Maureen de Valera.
Oh, Eamon de Valera's wife.
His daughter, her father was Eamon,
Eamon de Valera's daughter.
and he was president living in Orsanuk thereon. And on Friday evening, Maureen didn't drive. So the two of us had an early lunch together, and I drove her up to Orsanuk thereon, had a cup of tea there and a biscuit.
As you do.
And met a few little personalities there, and then drove into the Belvedere Hotel early for my meeting. And Seamus McAnulla was fascinated by this, always wanted the gossip, who was there and who was this, and how is Sinead, and do they live together, and so on. Jesus, they were 90 odd years of age, kind of, you know. But anyhow, so
was Sheila de Valera still alive at that time?
Oh, he was the president. That's right.
And his wife.
And his wife Sinead. I was very good friends with them, and he talked to me about where he learned his dancing in County Limerick on the Cork-Limerick borders, from a man that he dubbed Marish the Dust. Marish the Dust taught him his dancing. And Sinead and himself actually gave me little anecdotes about their own dancing days. She was older than him, but she was a tiny little lady. And then I would go on to meet up and the ad hoc committee. And being honest with you, there were very few people turning up to the committees. One other name that I forgot was Mary Walsh.
I think most of them are there in that photograph, the committee.
Yes, that was the committee in 72. We have no photographs at all of 1970. Matt was always there because his dancing class was just across the road, and Mary Duffy would continue the dancing class, and he was at the meeting. And Mary Walsh would come running in with all the latest news from America. And like that, she had a Mary McElroy, and Mary would continue the class, and Mary Walsh was there. And I have fond memories of those meetings, even though there was maybe only 2 or 3 of us there. Matt Milady taking out a cigarette box or a cigar box, and he drawing a sketch on it for me. And what it was, he was actually designing the medal, the first world medal. And I can see him saying he had the 4 provinces there.
Yeah.
Then that was to make out it was Irish, and then the globe, the world, to say that it was a world championship.
Did you manage to hold on at all to that little piece of paper, knowing you, John?
No, do you know,
that has been lovely.
I often said, if I had that now, it would be such a memento. But he was the first one that I remember coming up with the thing about the design of the medal. And that was only a matter of weeks away from the world. By the way, at those meetings as well, I gave a report on, we were all reporting on the split, because the split and the worlds were going hand in hand. Do we go ahead? Have we entries coming from anywhere? How do we know how many teachers we have left? So each one of us gave a little report. Eamon de Wall was over, I know, in London. I gave a report on Munster, Limerick All-State Commission and so on. But Cork was very split, and most of the prominent teachers in Cork were gone Cogall But anyhow, we combined those two topics because they had an interaction with each other.
But did that create a rift, John, beyond the split? I mean, I'm sure it's safe to say probably families split as well. You know, some family members went commission, some went Kogol. And that had to have been almost like
Yeah,
family splitting emotionally as well, or
yeah.
not.
I mean,
That happened.
Maureen Hall arrived in Ireland for the American teachers didn't know what this split was about. It had nothing really to do with them. But Maureen Hall arrived over from California, and she was visiting Peggy, of course. They were sisters in Cork, and Pat Hall, Maureen's daughter, was with her. And Maureen then went and visited Peggy and found out all about this thing that was going on. And Peggy was out and out Kogol spearheading it. So she got Maureen to go Kogol as well. And there was 3 of the MacTaggart sisters, all Kogol, registered in Alaska, in California, and in Cork. But like families split kind of with each other and cousins and so on. So
and at what stage did the Halls, they went back then commission?
Yes,
Hall went back commission.
Maureen actually tried to establish the Kogol in California and did set it up, and there were some teachers there that joined up with her that weren't commissioned, that joined up anyhow with the Kogol, but then it fizzled out. And then in later years, Maureen came back to the commission, and following that, Peggy didn't come back to the commission, you know. So anyhow, getting around to the Worlds, we were committed then to going ahead with the World Championships, and it was held the weekend after the All Ireland. Now, that didn't affect the Dublin people so much, but certainly it affected us down in Munster and so on. I come back to overseas.
But before you go to the overseas, John, why was it, as a matter of interest, was it just automatically decided by everyone that the Worlds would be held in Dublin? Was it always going to be Dublin? I'm just wondering, because of there being such a strong influence, I suppose, from Munster, and because Limerick predominantly went commission.
Well,
that solely went commission.
What was left on the commission, you see, really, when you say predominantly, a commission meeting in those times consisted of about 14 people or so, and quite a lot of them were on the committee. And one of the reasons as well for co-opting me onto the committee was they were all on, anyone that was on the committee for running the Oireachtas, they were nearly all from Dublin. It was totally top heavy. And I was co-opted on then to give Munster a voice in what was happening. But really, it was very dominated by the Dublin teachers. And to add insult to injury, the All Ireland was on one weekend in Colostevera, and that finished on Sunday night, and we went home, and we were back up the following Friday for the World Championships. This was a copy of a press release, by the way, that I have, that was issued in 1970 regarding the All Ireland and the World. That's an original document, and we had a reception in Dublin to launch that. So like the Worlds then started on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock or something. And
you might send me on, if you can, a photocopy of that document, and
Yeah.
I'll be able to include it in this.
Yeah.
At the end of it, I'll put it in the document. If it's a one-off, you know, it might be nice to have
Yeah.
this, you know. But
Yeah.
you,
So, like, I had dances in my senior team. I remember Aidan Punch in particular. He was at university. His finals in his first year were coming up, and I was asking him and all my other dancers to go to Dublin one weekend, to come home on a Sunday night, and to turn around again and get back up on Friday. And I mean, I tell you, traveling in those days wasn't as easy or comfortable, and we didn't have cars 10 a penny and so on and so forth. But all in all, it went ahead, and was opened in Colostovera within a few days of each other. It was held, I don't know, in May, but after that then, we had very little overseas entries. Yeah, I was going down that road.
I have it written down here to ask you the overseas.
Yeah, there were very few overseas people in it. I've researched this, and not in the 1971, it was 1971, 72 that the Americans really came on board. So
that was fairly quick, though. It was fairly quick that it happened fairly quickly that the Americans came on board. Do you know it? You know, within a year.
And I come back to that. A lot of it was due to they got sponsorship. But the first year in at the Worlds, you had Donny Golden. He came over, he danced in the All Ireland, and he stayed on and danced in the World. Then they had qualifying rounds in America. But qualifying is one thing in 1970, but to go to Dublin was another thing.
No, absolutely.
So there were two. Sean Ogle, he was the senior men's. He's now Monsignor Ogle in a church in the New York area. And there was a Colleen Werba, she was a senior ladies, and they got sponsorship. One of them was sponsored, their flight was by Aer Lingus, and the other was by the traditional Irish musicians. And then apart from those, we think now like of New York area, New Jersey being such a big, huge part of the dancing, but that was about all. You had a few dancers came from Tessie Burke School in Ohio.
I haven't heard of Tessie. Is Tessie still going strong?
I have lost track with her, and that's something I must check up.
I met her with Tony Tyrrell once, a funny lady.
A fantastic, an incredible character really, and a heart in Irish dancing. But she brought at least two dancers. One was Judy, an unusual name, Judy Bunsey, which would mean nothing to you, but she is now, we know her as Judy McCafferty. And her sister, it would have been her sister-in-law, Kathleen McCafferty. So they were from the Ohio area, and they came with their teacher, Tessie Burke. And then I mentioned Pat Hole. Mae Butler was huge. Mae Butler was teaching in Canada. She went there in 1950s, and she had the kind of up-to-date dancing from the 1950s in Ireland. And she had a fantastic class in Canada. She could hold her own very much so with anyone in New York at all. So she came and she brought, I think it was 30 odd dancers that she had all together. I'll show you, yes, Butler's dancers off to Dublin in 1970. There was 35 dancers from Butler School, 8 boys and 27 girls. So Butler had about 5 times more than all of the rest of North America combined.
And you know the amount of fundraising they must have done to actually get that distance. I mean, you have to be totally in admiration for the level of enthusiasm for the Irish culture that all these schools had, really, to actually go to that effort to
And Mae had only
come here.
introduced the dancing into Canada about 1953 or 54. I'll hold this up if you can see it.
That's perfect, perfectly clear.
Okay, it's a line of Butler dancers.
Move it back slightly, John, so I can see the boy and the other way. That's it. Excellent, perfect.
Okay, each one of them has a certificate. They had qualified at their qualifying round in New York to come to Ireland. And as you can see there, there's 2 boys, solo dancers, and there's, I think, 6 or 7 girls.
4, 5, 6, 7 girls.
But as well as that, she had teams in the figure dancing and the Caelia and everything. So she was a very staunch supporter, and really she made it a world championship, you know what I mean? Outside of her, by the way, we had dancers from England. One of them I must mention was Marion Thurley. She was at the first World in 1970.
She's actually behind me there with Colin Dunn.
It's with Colin. And Colin, there are all the world champion records there. We'll come back to that. And she had, by the way, I counted up at one stage, and Marion Thurley had something like 37 worlds to her credit. And that's a few years ago when I was doing it.
She's an amazing teacher. I mean, a beautiful style.
And her mother was always with her. Her mother was Irish, and they attended the first World Championship. And we were fascinated as well, like how the dancing has changed. Now, one of her dancers went on to become a teacher, and she was at the first World, and her name was Monica Buchik. And we were fascinated by the name Buchik. It turned out that her father was from the Ukraine. And that was such a novelty to us at that stage, because at that stage, Irish dancing was really for the Irish and the Irish diaspora.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated, like, to know, with a father from the Ukraine and so on, and a name like that, how did she become interested in Irish dancing? So
now it's nothing to us, John. Now it's absolutely nothing to us to hear Arab names, or to hear Israeli names, or to hear Polish or Russian.
Yeah, well, I know, like, we have at least 35 countries now participating in the World Championships. But that first year, the name Buchik kind of, you know.
Well, I was talking to Father Michael Johnson, and you're very fond of Michael. I said to him, "What do I call you? I feel conscious calling you Michael." And he said, "I don't care as long as it's not something bad. You can call me what you like." But Michael was saying to me that he had just won. I think he won 5 All-Irelands. But he said that he couldn't really afford to come over for the World Championships, and everyone was encouraging him to come over to do the Worlds, that he'd win the World if he came. And his mother couldn't afford, and he was afraid to put the expense on her, so he never came over. But he said of all the regrets he has, that is his regret.
Yeah.
That he didn't come, and actually that he couldn't say, "I have a World Championship," because, as he was saying, in those days, the All-Ireland was the championship to be at.
Yes. Yeah.
And
it had the prestige because it had the history.
And the world was new.
By the way, just going back a little bit, the idea that Matt Milady came up with was that the worlds would be a pyramid. Down at the bottom, you would have your regional championships. You would qualify to go forward to the All-Ireland Championships, and then you'd qualify from your nationals, the All-Ireland, the Americans, to go forward to the pyramid. Now, that was dropped after a few years. And one of the things that I remember was it was dropped because when you got to the top of the pyramid, there wouldn't be enough dancers to financially make it viable.
Yeah.
But in 1968, you had to qualify to enter in the All-Ireland Championship, and the All-Ireland Championships were closed to Ireland. And one of the families that came, for a few years later on, the idea was going around that now that the worlds are up and running, we should confine it, the All-Ireland should be for the Irish and so on. And one of the families was the famous Granger's family.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful, magnificent dancers and lovely family. And they fought nicely, tooth and nail. And I can remember one of them saying to Aidan Bunch, Aidan, you might be All-Ireland champion now, but before you were heard of, we were coming from Manchester, making this the event that it is. And now you're turning around to tell us we can't compete. The All-Ireland meant everything to them, you know? And the same to Michael Johnson.
It meant everything to Michael. He said it to me. He said, I was probably one of the few people that won. And I think he was probably the first to win five All-Irelands. And then to miss out in the world, he said, it would have been the icing on the cake had he gone. But he said he couldn't put the expense on his mother.
Yeah.
You know, at the time, and even competition, he was saying, you know, having a second class when Ted Kavanagh suggested he come to a second class, he was terrified to say it at home because he didn't think his mother would have enough money to send him to a second class.
Yeah.
And you know, and I'm very conscious of that even now, that of the importance of keeping it within a financial status that every child can go to, because you are going to get that really exceptional child who can't afford competitions, or can't afford the costumes, or can't afford the classes. And
travel in every sense was so expensive in those days. Coming back, by the way, to the changeover from 1970, little or no dances from United States. Then what happened was they got sponsorship. And the next year, either 71 or 72, they actually chartered a jumbo jet to come to Ireland. And that took terrific cooperation. An awful lot of the sponsorship came from the traditional Irish Music Society in New York. And by the way, one of the people whose family were involved in that were, what's her name? She's the chair of the of the Údarás now. Mary Lou Shade. Sorry, Mary Lou.
How could you forget Mary Lou? She's unforgettable.
And her family were very much involved in the Irish music, and they sponsored grants for the dancers to come to Ireland. And so I think the following year there was about 55 dancers, plus all their families, got on board a jumbo jet and landed in Dublin for the World Championships. I know that Mary Walsh was so excited over it because she was the liaison officer with America. And I went up to Dublin a few days early just in order to go out to see a jumbo jet landing and all these dances coming from America. So that brought about the change and the fantastic interest, and a very big number. Like, I think I could count on less than that hand how many American teachers were at the first World Championships. If it was 2 or if it was 3, that was as much. Possibly Mae Butler from such a thing, Tessie Burke and so on. But then they really got involved in the World Championships, and 71 and 72 was the real kind of when the World Championships, yes, we were right to go ahead with it. Yes, we have a World Championship. Yes, we are justified in calling it a World Championship now, because we have America, we have Canada, and so on and so forth.
And England.
Coming on board. In the very early years then, the overseas travellers, the Americans, it was very much a learning process, and sometimes led to a lot of disappointment, because they were cock of the walk kind of in America, doing their Irish dancing, so proud of their Irish culture and so on. And then they came, and the first 1 or 2 years, they won nothing. So we actually had to encourage them to come by introducing overseas awards.
Yes. Yeah.
You know? And the first sign of they getting an overseas award was just, wow, the whole place erupted, and it did the trick. Because, see, they were learning an awful lot. We put 2 or 3 dances out on stage dancing together. They had never come across that in America. They danced one by one down the line, and then by the time they came, the World Championships had moved to the Mansion House, and they were dancing on a stage that went, and so the dancing was quite different. And their costume.
We didn't feel like we were dancing on a slope, John. And when I was dancing at the Worlds, you were just taken away by the moment. You never even felt. It's only when you look back in it now and you realize, Jesus, I was dancing on a slope. And it was only Michael Dillon was talking about it one day, about the slope on the stage. And oh wow, there was a slope on the stage, but I couldn't, you don't think of that because it's all you're used to.
Oh God, if you were to take a look at it now, the dancers would say, when I hear them now say, oh, the stage has got to be 40 foot wide for us to dance. Now they're glad to dance on a little board. COVID has done something. But if you show them the stage now with the slope on it, they would have a fit.
John, I danced in Bunratty on flagstone floors. We danced on a stage that had a glass centre on it. The stage was only about 4 foot by 4 foot, with a glass centre on it so that it lit up underneath with lights to show the costumes. And I was spun around on the stage one day and my foot went right through it, up as far as my hip, and I broke the glass straight down. You wouldn't do that now. Could you imagine anyone dancing on flagstone now, or dancing on a stage that was so precarious? But we did.
Yeah, I'm coming back then to the overseas World Championships, and pardon me, the first one really that made a breakthrough was Michael Flatley. I think it was.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Michael Flatley.
1975.
Yeah.
He won the world under 15 or under 17. Now, he won one world. He didn't win after that, but Tim O'Hare the following year, Tim O'Hare won the same age group. So I think that was 1976 and 77. So Tim won 2 world championships. And this was all cementing the whole thing together. We were now a kind of competing on a more equal footing. Then you had one of the girls, rightly so, was kind of, say, a Butler dancer, and that is...
I know, I have the photograph here. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, that was Ruth Garrett, and she won the first, she was the first American female to win it.
Wasn't her costume beautiful? I mean,
absolutely beautiful. Yeah, beautiful costume.
So there.
Oh yeah, so Irish. And I got onto her, and I spent years trying to track her down. And when I tracked her down, it was Laura Masters put me in contact, and she sent me that photograph. And that photograph has come out of the artworks. It was buried, and she was really, I think, not too involved in the dancing at all, if at all.
I mean, I love the costumes now. I really love the costumes, but I really do believe that there's room for the Book of Kells influence to be brought back into them, and for the embroidery to be brought. I know it takes a long. The embroidery is meticulous and detailed, and I did a lot of embroidery, but it's an art form that you don't see in any other cultural costume, and it's a pity that it's lost, but it's very, very predominant on that costume.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. But that was a time when, like, it was the Irish and the Irish diaspora around the world who had a sense of Irish culture, and so on. And as I say, nowadays, the dancing is being performed as an exotic, intricate footwork, and not necessarily to express your Irish culture. But that was a beautiful photograph. Now, the funny thing, it was, I suppose, appropriate that it was a Butler, a dancer from Butlers, because they were such a support to the World Championships.
Yeah.
The next female from United States was Teresa O'Sullivan, but she was about 8 or 10 years after Ruth.
Yeah.
That an American female dancer won it. And she was, her mother was Anna O'Sullivan, dancing teacher. So, oh yes, you have various ones down there. That is, that photograph there, up the other side, yeah. That was a press conference, up, fingers up, yeah. That's Cormac McGinley at the press conference in 1970. And that was Laura Masters and Ruth Garrett. And then that was Sean Ogle, who's now Monsignor Ogle, at that press conference. We had a little reception. The committee of the Oireachtas, so I was there, and held in Dublin. And we invited the press and the few dancers who were there overseas from the Worlds were invited to a little reception before the Worlds. And that was taken at that event.
That's a great photograph of Inishalga.
Yes, it was taken very good. And I also, the person doing my book, she edited out all the sides and emphasized the kind of pyramid from Mary Duffy down. And at the early years of the world, Mary Duffy's like Inishalga weren't as established. But by God, after that, they won everything kind of in all the Céilís and the figures and the dance drama, the whole lot of those.
Yeah. There were some great schools then, do you know, at the Worlds, I mean, as there are now, but I mean, when you look at the likes of Inishalga, Ted Kavanagh, O'Rourke's, Nolan's, yourselves, do you know, there was some great team competitions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And actually, I was talking about, you know, what you were saying about the figures going into decline, and and I was talking about it in one of the interviews, and uh, they were saying they were agreeing with the fact that it's a lot to do with the hand movements now becoming very staccato and very
yeah.
exaggerated. And they were saying to me that there was talk that there was going to be two different competitions, the traditional style of figure. It was actually uh, it was actually the two different types of figure dancing, you know, the traditional type of figure plus the more contemporary type of figure competition, and that might actually improve the figures, the amount of competitors taking part in it. It was Breda Pierce I was talking to, and Breda was saying, you know, that she finds it very difficult to actually put together figures because the amount of work that goes into it. Whereas if it was a traditional figure, it would be much easier for her to put together teams. And, you know, I said, well, hopefully they'll split the competitions and maybe have a traditional figure and a more contemporary figure competition, and that might increase the numbers.
By the way, if I come back for a moment to the figure and Australia, in
It's huge in Australia, she was saying.
In 2018, I was invited out as their honoured guest to the championships in Cairns. And the year before that, I was invited out to Adelaide as their guest because it was their 50th Teachers Association. And on both counts, I was bowled over by the standard of the figure dancing.
Yeah.
Terrific standard of figure dancing. In Cairns, I actually said, I think the world, or the Commissioner Oireachtas should almost franchise out the World Championships for the Australians to run it, because they were beautiful. Beautiful
As
team.
she said, you'd be blown away. You could have about 30 or 40 teams in a competition. And she said John came out and he was astonished by the amount of teams that were in it. And all that any adjudicator coming out are taken by the amount of figures. But why is that not translating to coming over to this country for the Worlds?
Well, that I was speaking to them about that, and I mean, the cost of getting a team over. Well, I know they did it in the early years. Ransley School and some of those brought teams, and Ransley's won a world championship there. But nowadays, to get a full group for a figure dance off of school, education, etc., and the cost of it alone would be just prohibitive. But even in Australia, they did have, somebody said to me, who did you go for? And I said, I have 3 firsts. And I said, I have first was in the zigzaggy competition, because there was a few teams that, a few teams that were more conservative.
Yeah.
There was a few teams that portrayed the image. There was the 3 different.
You could have split it into 3 different genres.
Yeah. Yes.
And you would have had your winner in each genre of figure dance, contemporary, traditional, and flashy, if you like, you know.
So it is interesting, because when Tom Farley went out there first, he was encouraging them to do figure dancing and to do Cayley dancing and so on and so forth. And as I say, I was...
I couldn't think of the name of the forehand for the life of me, and I was trying to say it, and I was thinking, is it Glen Carr or Glen something or
Castlebridge forehand.
Castlebridge.
Castlebridge forehand. Think of my anecdote that I made up about Prague, the castle in Prague and the Charles V Bridge.
Castlebridge forehand. I could not think of it, but I was saying it to Breda Pierce. I was saying that one of their teachers out there was, and I'll be interviewing her, is the first person to have done the Castlebridge forehand out there. But it just would not come to me, Castlebridge. And I said, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could see some schools doing the Castlebridge, or maybe or having a competition for the Castlebridge forehand, and one for the Kerry forehand that we do now ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the figure, I was doing the microphone in one of the halls in Philadelphia, and there was one team in a minor figure. And I always remember the comment, and the dancers asking the teacher, where's the other classes? Are we on first? And she said, you are on first because you're the only team. And I said, so what? Okay. And they were surprised.
So destroying, John.
And she said to them, well, if you dance very good, and they asked me then, if they dance very good and they won, would they get a medal? And reluctantly, it was choking me. I had to say, yes, you will be the world champions, even if you bash each other on the stage, and you will all get a world medal because there was only one team in it. But an interesting point was when the world went to Montreal in Canada, the entries were quite substantial, but there was little or no fall in the Cayleys, but the figure dancing really collapsed in it, and that had a kind of a message as far as I could see. It was kind of that the distance and the remoteness of it had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
The time the figure dancing was in Philadelphia, you had only, I think, one team from Ireland and about 3 or 4 from America. So the traveling around to remote places or places does not affect the entries in the solo. The girls in particular will go high hell or water, and the boys solos, but getting figure dancing teams to go, that has can have a very detrimental effect on where it is being held. Yeah. Now, you have an interesting photograph up here on your left. No, your other hand, yeah.
My other left.
That photograph, that's Vivian Pentney.
Yeah.
She won the first World Championship.
Yeah.
And that is then Alice Boyle next to her. And then over on the right is Breda McInerney.
Yeah.
Third in it. Now, Alice Boyle, by the way, she was very friendly
with Alice.
And married, what's his name?
She married Pucker Bwilla.
No.
Pucker Bwilla. What's his name? O'Dowda. Sean O'Dowda. Brendan O'Dowda.
And during the World Championships, when we were waiting for results, do you know that he entertained us singing? It was a wonderful.
Fabulous singer, wasn't he?
In the first World Championships, he came up and sang.
Yeah, Brendan O'Dowda was a fabulous singer.
And it made it for people coming from abroad. This was truly Irish. While you're waiting for the results, they have this amazing singer kind of.
Like the Rosa Tralee.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. This is the cup that Vivian Pentney won, but where it went to after that, I don't know, because it you look at, if you look at Rinka,
Oh, that's amazing. That book.
Kathleen O'Shea,
Yeah.
Kathleen O'Shea won 3 senior lady.
Behind me there, look.
Sorry?
It's behind me.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yes, it is. But she got a statuette, which personally I had no love at all for those statuettes. I think they were cheap and gaudy. And that lovely cup, which was the Earn Food Trophy, 2 years later, it was gone. I don't know where it went to, you know? So that was a beautiful trophy. Down below then, as I say, you have Kathleen O'Shea. That photograph in Rinka has behind your shoulder there. That has a few interesting points. Kathleen didn't dance in the first world because Ted Kavanagh, I think, was judging, or they didn't participate anyhow. It took quite a lot of twisting to get Ted to support the Worlds. He was so anti the Worlds. The All Irelands were his history.
Yeah, he was a very traditionalist.
Yeah, she won it 3 times in a row, and then her daughter Ellie McGuire, she won 3 championships in a row. So you have a nice little record there. Mother and daughter, both 3 in a row.
Yeah.
And the other one then is you have with her Tony Roddy.
Tony Roddy would have been in. Yeah, I remember watching Tony Roddy dancing.
Yeah, beautiful, neat style of dancing, really. Now, the interesting thing is he is wearing a belt, and that is 1973. And that was the first year that belts were introduced at the World Championship.
Yeah, you're talking about records. There's another record, the Gardner Brothers, 2 brothers winning the world.
Before we go on to them, Tony Roddy and his son Pat Roddy.
Right, yeah.
Father and son.
Father and son.
Now you have, as you point out there, the 2 brothers, the Gardner brothers from Galway. They both won world championships, but that was not a first record in their case, because if you remember nearer home, Cian and Darren Olin both won the world championships the year that it was held in Limerick. So you have various records.
The 2 sisters, the Greys.
Yeah, there was
Frida Gray and her sister. They won the worlds as well.
I think there was 2 or 3 of there was 2 of them, and there was another family from the Midlands that there was 3 in the family won it. But going back to records, then behind, it was up a while ago. We had Colin O'Shea from Dublin.
Yeah.
He still holds, as far as I know.
He won the most worlds. He won 11 worlds.
And
Grania Feely won 10.
Won 10. And what's his name? Kevin McCormack, I think he won 10 as well. But Colin was there. He won the 11. And that one is Teresa Sullivan, then the first American to win United States. And that's John Jennings. In my book on America, I omitted to John Jennings as a pupil of Donny Golden's. He had Stephen Gallagher and John Jennings and several other world championships, and I missed out on 2 of them to include.
And Janie McArdle behind me.
Janie McArdle.
Janie was in my age group. Janie McArdle and Celine Wiley. We would have been in the same age group.
Started her dancing in New York with Jerry Mulvihill, who came from Kerry originally. So she started dancing there and danced, I think, at her first world with Jerry Mulvihill. And then the family came back to live in Ireland.
Yeah.
She joined up the famous Matthew School, and that's her photograph with a very, very famous teacher, Pat Matthews, Mrs. M, as
I'll be
every
bringing those photographs out.
called her. She was a terrific teacher.
And then Grania, you have Grania, and you have Grania, and you have, as I say, you have Colin Dunn with Mary Duffy, well, Mary Duffy, as I, with his teacher.
Yes, I have 2 photographs of Colin in my book.
Yeah.
I think he won 9 or 10.
There's another one that you have in your book of him when he was when he won his first world.
That's that photograph.
Yeah, that's that photograph.
And again, as I say, she was an incredible teacher. And that photograph is Colin Dunn as a young fella.
Yeah, I have that on here as well.
Won his first world championship. Now, at that stage, he was dancing for the Comerford School in Birmingham. So he was a consistent world champion right through. And the Comerfords.
There he is behind me there on my, beside Michael Danlan.
Michael Danlan, yes.
Michael Danlan, and there's Colin when he won his first world.
First world, yes. As I say, he was dancing with the Comerford School then. There was Aidan Comerford and his wife were teaching in Birmingham, and Birmingham was, country in those days, was a huge area for figure dancing and Cayley dancing, and for feshes was incredibly, but again, it was the era when the Irish diaspora were at their height, kind of, you know. And then the photograph behind you is, what's the name? Oh, that's
Michael Flatley, anyway, behind there.
And next to him is Tim O'Hare.
Tim O'Hare, Lord rest him.
Then is, well, that's Yvonne Kelly, I think.
Yeah.
Then the other one is Ruth Garrett. 3 of them were world champions. As I say, Tim won it twice.
Twice, and Michael once.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing, John. It's an amazing legacy to have created, to have been there when it, you know, at the very first. Must feel somewhat very, I mean, not somewhat, but very sad that at the 50th anniversary that this has happened. Yes,
I must admit there were 1 or 2 incidents in my World Championship days that I'd like to mention. First of all, one that came off, that was the 25th World Championship. We were invited out, the committee were invited to various receptions, and we had a reception out in Cullinane in the Australian ambassador's residence. And the following day we had one in the Canadian ambassador's residence. And the next day was a very special day for me. We were invited up to the grounds of Phoenix Park to the American Embassy, and we were received there by Jean Kennedy Smith. And it was, for me, a very historical kind of thing, because she was so down to earth, perfectly charming, down to earth, and invited us to look at anything around in her living room, but not to touch it. She would explain everything. And so it was lovely to see photographs of John F. Kay and her, such a thing, and to think this is her brother here at the United States, such an iconic figure. And she had that reception. That was one memory that I have. the other memory then that I was going to look forward to and dine out on was the commemoration that I was one of the people there and on the committee 50 years ago. But that was not to be.
Well, it'll be next year, please God.
So it would be just even nicer to say I was on the thing 51 years ago.
John, I don't know if you know it. I have the greatest pleasure, and I suppose we here at LIR have the greatest pleasure I'll be interviewing Dan Mulhall, Irish ambassador to the US. And I'm really looking forward to that, because I know he was there when he was the Irish ambassador to Britain when the World Championships were held in Britain, and he was at the launch of the World Championships in London. So and he was also the Irish ambassador to Canada and Fiji Islands. So
he had a reception for us in the Irish Embassy, and at that reception he launched my book on the history of Irish dancing in London, and so that was a very proud moment for me, because the reception was absolutely beautiful. It was the time when it suddenly peaked that it was so proud to be Irish. That was our president, Michael D. Higgins, was visiting with the Queen in Windsor Castle, and a few days before that had stood in that very room, and Dan Mulhall put on, and his wife put on
the character.
Lovely reception for us. And indeed, I was talking with her, and one of the photographs that I sent you in that press article was she was talking with some of the Australian teachers, and it turned out that the wife, she said to me, she said, I was born in Australia.
Australia, yeah.
And something like, do you know the dancing, Irish dancing in Australia? And Jan Byrne was there, and she laughed and she said, oh, he's written the book for us. So I actually sent her on the book on the history of Irish dancing in Australia. And that was a very proud night. I went to the window of that embassy, and if you just look over to the side, you're looking at the very end of the gardens of Buckingham Palace. And I was so proud, thinking that my parents performed their Irish dancing when it was dangerous and so on, and they performed it as an expression of their Irish national identity. And here we were, for one period in our life, really being welcomed to London with our Irish dancing, and proud to be Irish.
Well, Pat here now, he interviewed the former ambassador to Canada there recently as well, and he was actually very great friends with Irish dancing teachers in Canada, and he was talking about the immense work that's been done by Irish people abroad, and by Irish people with Irish antecedents abroad, to try and promote the Irish dancing culture, and to try and promote the Irish culture in general in Canada and in the US, really, and all over the world, really. I mean, it's going from strength to strength. Little did you think, John, 50 years ago, when you set up the World Championships, that it would go from such a small venue to really now there's no place big enough.
Well, that is one of our major problems. The first year that the World
Apart from maybe the waterfront in Belfast, that seems to be huge, enormous, and I suppose City West. They're about. It's hard to imagine how big it's gone.
Yes. I was just going to say, the first year we didn't have any records of our entries, and there was no printed syllabus the first year, 1970. the first syllabus that came out was 1971, and I'm grateful to John McIntaggart and Magella, his wife.
Yeah, Magella.
Copy of that. And from that, I was able to figure out that in 1972, oh yeah, that is the precious one. It was program 1971. And I'm still missing a few programs, but I'll be appealing. But anyhow, from the program, the syllabus in 1972, I was able to make out that we had something like 403 solo entries in 10 championships. And now, kind of, by the way, when we did away with qualifying, the Worlds in Cork spiked enormously. We had 1,166 females in the Worlds in Cork, over 4 times the amount. So we are now gone to something like from 402 solos to so many thousand solos, really. It is incredible. Also, I feel kind of that globally, we have spread to places. We had teams from Russia and teams from Hungary participating in dance dramas. And we had, I think about 2 years ago, I was in City West, and we had a team from Mexico winning the fifth. Kind of,
that's fabulous.
And so, we had, nearer to my heart as well, we had Cayley teams from South Africa in both senior mixed and senior.
Fabulous.
You know, so the world is our oyster.
And on that point, John, that's the perfect ending for this show. We will be back with John Cullinane again for another episode. We'll decide after the show what that will be. I'll let it up to John. It's entirely up to him what we discuss. But in the meantime, Dr. John Cullinane, it's been. Do you want to say something?
Yes. If anybody has a program from the Worlds for the following 4 years, please contact me. 82, 83, 90, and 91. And if you have all 4, shout bingo and I'll give you a prize.
Programs.
82, 83.
1982, 83, 1990, and 1991.
And thanks to John and Magella. John McIntaggart, he won the very early World Championships. I think he was under 13 at the time, and he's now an officer in the commission. And they kindly donated that to me, because for years, I didn't even know there was one for 1971.
Oh, isn't that amazing? That's fantastic. Well, on that point, Dr. John Cullinane, it's been immense having you on again, and you've just blown me away, 1 with your knowledge, and 2 with your determination and utter drive to promote and, I suppose, record history, the history of Irish dance. And until the next time, John, good day, Shiv Sloan.
Thanks, Mary.